Chapter 2 of Beyond the Rocks, a Love Story by Eleanor Glynn. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Amy Deutschler. It was a year later before Theodora saw her family again. A very severe attack of bronchitis complicated by internal catarrh prostrated Josiah Brown in the first days of their marriage, and had turned her into a superintendent nurse for the next 3 months. By that time, a winter at Allure was recommended by the best physicians, and off they started. Allure, with a semi-invalid, a hospital nurse, and quantities of medicine bottles and draught protectors, is not the ideal place one reads of in guidebooks. Theodora grew to hate the sky and the blue Mediterranean. She used to sit on her balcony at Costebel and gaze at the olive trees and the deep green velvet patch of firs beyond towards the sea and wonder at life. She longed to go to the islands, anywhere beyond, and one day she read Jean de Grève, and after that she wondered what love was. It took a mighty hold upon her imagination. It seemed to her it must mean life. It was the beginning of May before Josiah Brown thought of leaving for Paris. England would be their destination, but the doctors assured him a month of Paris would break the change of climate with more safety than if they crossed the Channel at once. Costebel was a fairyland of roses as they drove to the station, and peace had descended upon Theodora. She had fallen into her place, a place occupied by many wives before her with irritable, hypochondriacal husbands. She had often been to Paris in her maiden days. She knew it from the point of view of a cheap boarding house and snatched meals. But the unchecked gaiety of the air and the façon had not been tarnished by that. She had played in the Tuileries Gardens and watched Ponchinello at the Rond Point, and later been taken once or twice to dine at a cheap café in the Bois by Papa. And once she had gone to Robinson on a coach with him and some aristocratic acquaintances of his, and eaten luncheon up the tree, and that was a day of the gods and to be remembered. But now they were going to an expensive, well-managed private hotel in the Avenue du Bois, suitable to invalids, and it poured with rain as they drove from the Gare de Lyon. All this time something in Theodora was developing. Her beautiful face had an air of dignity. The set of her little Greek head would have driven a sculptor wild. And Josiah Brown was very generous in money matters, and she had always known how to wear her clothes, so it was no wonder people stopped and turned their heads when she passed. Josiah Brown possessed certainly not less than $40,000 a year, and so he felt he could afford a carriage in Paris, and any other fancy he pleased. His nerves had been too shaken by his illness to appreciate the joys of an automobile. Thus daily might be seen in the Avenue des Acacias this ill-sorted pair, seated in a smart Victoria with stepping horses, driving slowly up and down, and a number of people took an interest in them. Towards the middle of May, Captain Fitzgerald arrived at the Continental, and Theodora felt her heart beat with joy when she saw his handsome, well-groomed head. Oh yes, it had been indeed worthwhile to make Papa look so prosperous as that, so prosperous and happy, dear gay Papa. He was about the same age as her husband, but no one would think of taking him for more than 40. And what a figure he had, and what manners! And when he patted her cheek, Theodora felt at once that thrill of pride and gratification she had always experienced when he was pleased with her, from her youngest days. She was almost glad Sarah and Clementine should have remained at Dieppe. Thus she could have Papa all to herself, and oh, what presents she would send them back by him when he returned. Josiah Brown despised Dominic Fitzgerald, and yet stood in awe of him as well. A man who could spend a fortune and be content to live on odds and ends for the rest of his life must be a poor creature. But, on the other hand, there was that uncomfortable sense of breeding about him which once, when Captain Fitzgerald had risen to a situation of dignity during their preliminary conversations about Theodora's hand, had made Josiah Brown unconsciously say, "Sir," to him. He had blushed and bitten his tongue for doing it, and had blustered and patronized immoderately afterwards, but he never forgot the incident. They were not birds of a feather, and never would be, though the exquisite manners of Dominic Fitzgerald could carry any situation. Josiah was not altogether pleased to see his father-in-law. He even experienced a little jealousy. Theodora's face, which generally wore a mask of gentle, solicitous meekness for him, suddenly sparkled and rippled with laughter as she pinched her papa's ears and pulled his mustache and purred into his neck with joy at their meeting. It was that purring sound and those caressing tricks that Josiah Brown objected to. He had never received any of them himself, and so why should Dominic Fitzgerald? Captain Fitzgerald, for his part, was enchanted to clasp his beautiful daughter once more in his arms. He had always loved Theodora, and when he saw her so quite too desirable looking in her exquisite clothes, he felt a very fine fellow himself, thinking what he had done for her. It was not an unnatural circumstance that he should look upon the idea of a dinner at the respectable private hotel with his son-in-law and daughter as a trifle dull for Paris, or that he should have suggested a meal at the Ritz would do them both good. "Come and dine with me instead, my dear child," he said, with his grand air. "Josiah, you must begin to go out a little and shake off your illness, my dear fellow." But Josiah was peevish. Not tonight, certainly not tonight. It was the evening he was to take the 2 doses of his new medicine, one half an hour after the other, and he could not leave the hotel. Then he saw how poor Theodora's face fell, and one of his sparks of consideration for the feelings of others came to him, and he announced gruffly that his wife might go with her father if she pleased, provided she crept into her room, which was next door to his own, without the least noise on her return. "I must not be disturbed in my first sleep," he said, and Theodora thanked him rapturously. It was so good of him to let her go. She would indeed make not the least noise, and she danced out of the room to get ready in a way Josiah Brown had never seen her do before. And after she had gone, Captain Fitzgerald came back to fetch her. This fact rankled with him and prevented his sleep for more than 20 minutes. "My sweet child," said Captain Fitzgerald, when he was seated beside his daughter in her brougham rolling down the Champs-Élysées, "you must not be so grateful. He won't let you out again if you are." "Oh, Papa," said Theodora. They arrived at the Ritz just at the right moment. It was a lovely night, but rather cold, so there were no diners in the garden, and the crowd from the restaurant extended even into the hall. It was an immense satisfaction to Dominic Fitzgerald to walk through them all with this singularly beautiful young woman, and to remark the effect she produced, and his cup of happiness was full when they came upon a party at the lower end by the door, prominent as hostess being Jane Anastasia McBride, the fabulously rich American widow. In a second of time he reviewed the situation. A faint coldness in his manner would be the thing to draw, and it was, for when he had greeted Mrs. McBride without gush, and presented his daughter with the air of just passing on, the widow implored them with great cordiality to leave their solitary meal and join her party, nor would she hear of any refusal. The whole scene was so novel and delightful to Theodora, she cared not at all whether her father accepted or no, so long as she might sit quietly and observe the world. Mrs. McBride had perceived immediately that the string of pearls round Mrs. Josiah Brown's neck could not have cost less than £9,000, and that her frock, although so simple, was the last and most expensive creation of Cleopatra. She had always been horribly attracted by Captain Fitzgerald, ever since that race week at Trouville 2 summers ago, and fate had sent them here tonight, and she meant to enjoy herself. Captain Fitzgerald acceded to her request with his usual polished ease, and the radiant widow presented the rest of her guests to the 2 newcomers. The tall man with a fierce beard was Prince Worzoff, married to her niece, Sadie Butcher. Sadie Butcher was short and had a voice you could hear across the room. The sleek, fair youth with the twinkling gray eyes was an Englishman from the embassy. The disagreeable-looking woman in the badly made mauve silk was his sister, Lady Hilden. The stout, hook-nosed bird of prey with the heavy gold chain was a Western millionaire, and the smiling girl was his daughter. Then, last of all, came Lord Bracondale, and it was when he was presented that Theodora first began to take an interest in the party. Hector, 14th